They won the American Revolution, and America pretended they never existed. Not a footnote, not an oversight, a deliberate, calculated erasure. In 1778, a battalion of black soldiers, many of them still wearing the chains of slavery just months before, stood between George Washington and Oppos' army and complete annihilation. British forces, elite Hessian mercenaries, 3 separate charges. For hours of brutal combat, the line did not break. The Continental Army survived. The revolution was saved. And when the war was over, Washington personally sent those men back to their masters in chains. This is the story they buried for 200 years. And tonight, we and Oppos, redigging it back up. The year is 1775. The colonies are at war, and the Continental Army is already falling apart. Men are deserting by the hundreds. Disease is ripping through the camps. Entire regiments are down to skeleton crews. The British have professional soldiers, a world-class navy, and the resources to outlast the colonists for decades. The revolution is on the verge of collapse before it even begins. George Washington is desperate. He needs bodies. He needs fighters. He needs anyone willing to pick up a musket and stand in a line. And here is what your history textbook never told you. At this exact moment, nearly 500,000 enslaved Africans are living in the 13 colonies. They built the roads. They harvested the crops. They generated the wealth that made the revolution possible in the first place. They had no freedom, no rights, no future. They were property. But both sides in this war saw something in their desperation. An opportunity. And what happened next would change everything. And then get buried so deep that most Americans today have never heard a single word of it. November 1775. Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, issues a proclamation that sends shockwaves through every plantation in the South. Any enslaved person who escapes their master and joins the British forces will be granted their freedom. Now, understand exactly what this was. The British did not suddenly care about black liberation. This was cold military strategy. Weaken the colonial economy. Gain soldiers. That is all it was. But for thousands of enslaved people, it didn't. And Oppos, matter why the offer was made. It was a chance at freedom. And they ran. Thousands of black men, women, and children fled plantations in the middle of the night. They risked everything. Capture meant torture. It meant being sold away from their children. It meant death. They ran anyway. The British organized them into fighting units. The Ethiopian Regiment. Armed. Uniformed. Free. And the slaveholding patriots? They panicked. Not just because of the economics. Not just because they were losing their labor force. They panicked because they were terrified of something deeper. Armed black men. The idea that enslaved people could fight back. That terror would shape every decision the Continental Army made for the next 3 years. Stop for a second. Put yourself in that moment. You have been someone in Oppos' property your entire life. You have never been allowed to read. Never been allowed to own anything. Never been allowed to decide where you sleep or what you eat or whether your children will be sold away from you tomorrow morning. And now, someone is handing you a musket and telling you that you are free. That is not a small thing. That is the difference between existing and living. Remember that feeling. Because what America did with it is one of the most shameful chapters in the history of this country. For the first 2 years of the war, Washington and the Continental Congress officially refused to enlist black soldiers. The reason is exactly what you think it is. Southern plantation owners demand it. They are terrified of the precedent. If black men can fight for freedom, if black men can earn their liberty on a battlefield, then the entire justification for slavery begins to crack. So they block it. They argue. They stall. But by 1777, the Continental Army is hemorrhaging soldiers at a rate that cannot be ignored. Enlistment is collapsing. Entire regiments are ghosts of what they once were. Rhode Island is facing a military quota it simply cannot fill. So in February 1778, the Rhode Island General Assembly makes a decision that shocks the entire country. Enslaved men can enlist in the Continental Army in exchange for their freedom. Their masters will be compensated by the state. Cold. Transactional. Completely devoid of moral courage. But for the men who signed up, it was everything. Over 200 black men join what becomes known as the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. They are told they are fighting for liberty. They are told they will be free men when this war is over. They believe it. They have no idea what is coming. From the very first day, the regiment is treated as inferior. Outdated muskets, threadbare uniforms, less pay than white soldiers doing the exact same job in the exact same conditions. Southern representatives in Congress are furious the unit even exists. Slaveholders write letters of complaint. Newspapers mock the idea of black patriots. Some Northern officers refuse to hide their disgust at the thought of serving alongside former slaves. And here, right here, is where the erasure begins. Not after the war. Not in some history book written 50 years later. Right now, while these men are still alive, still training, still preparing to die for a country that cannot even bring itself to respect them. Their names are being left out of official reports. Their existence is being treated as an embarrassing necessity. The story is being shaped, carefully, deliberately, before a single battle has even been fought. History is not being written. It is being curated. And black soldiers are already being edited out in real time. What happens next will make that erasure even more unforgivable. August 29, 1778. The Battle of Rhode Island. This is the moment that should be taught in every single history class in America. Most people have never heard of it. British forces, backed by elite Hessian mercenaries, some of the most feared fighters in the world, launch a massive coordinated assault on the American retreat from Newport. The Continental Army is surrounded, outnumbered, in full, imminent danger of being completely annihilated. If they fall here, the revolution in the North is finished. Washington orders a retreat. But someone has to hold the line. Someone has to stand still while everyone else runs. Someone has to buy time, with their bodies, for the rest of the army to escape. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment is sent forward. Let that land. Men who were enslaved just months ago. Men who were handed outdated weapons and told they were worth less than the soldiers beside them. Men whose existence was considered an embarrassment by the very government they were fighting for. Those men are now the last thing standing between the Continental Army and total destruction. And they do not flinch. For 4 hours, the black soldiers of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment hold off 3 separate charges by elite Hessian troops. Bayonets, hand to hand. Smoke so thick they can barely see. Men falling on both sides. The line does not break. They do not retreat. They save the Continental Army. One officer writes in his diary that the black regiment fought with, and I need you to hear this, desperate valor. Another officer states that their defense was the single best fought action of the entire war. But when the official reports are filed with Congress, when the dispatches are written for the newspapers, when the story of the Battle of Rhode Island is recorded for history, the race of the soldiers is omitted. They are listed simply as Rhode Island troops. That is it. The men who just performed one of the most heroic military actions of the entire Revolutionary War, reduced to 2 words. The erasure does not wait for the war to end. It is already happening. Right now. In real time. While the blood is still drying on the ground. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment fights on. They are at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. The final battle. The moment Lord Cornwallis surrenders and the United States of America officially wins its independence. They are there. They fought. They bled. They survived. And when the war ends, they wait. They wait for the freedom they were promised. They wait for the country they saved to honor its word. What happens next is one of the most deliberate betrayals in American history. Slaveholders from the South demand their property be returned. Political deals are struck behind closed doors. Promises made to black soldiers are quietly walked back without a single public announcement. Some soldiers are re-enslaved. Others receive no land, no pension, no compensation, nothing at all. George Washington, the man on your dollar bill, the man history calls the father of this nation, personally facilitates the return of enslaved soldiers to their masters as part of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Men who served under his command. Men who bled for a revolution built on the words, all men are created equal. He sent them back. Because keeping the Southern states politically unified was more important than honoring promises made to black patriots. And in Rhode Island, the very state that freed these men to fight, new laws are quietly passed ensuring that the children of black soldiers can still be born into slavery. The promise of freedom had fine print. It always did. And the fine print always protected the same thing. Within one generation, the story is gone. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment is quietly disbanded. Its records are scattered. Its soldiers are forgotten. Textbooks do not mention them. Paintings of famous battles show only white soldiers. Monuments honor white generals and white heroes. By the 1800s, the narrative of the American Revolution has been sealed and locked. White patriots, white founders, white freedom. And here is what you need to understand. This was not an accident. This was not an oversight. This was a choice, deliberate, coordinated, and sustained across generations, to rewrite history in a way that justified slavery, that protected white supremacy, that buried the truth that America owed its very existence to people it refused to see as human. Think about the logic underneath that erasure. If black men can fight as bravely as white men, if they can save the Continental Army, if they can secure independence for an entire nation, then how can anyone justify owning them? They couldn't and oppose. So they erased the evidence. At least 5,000 black soldiers fought for the Continental Army. Another 20,000 fought for the British, seeking the freedom that the Patriots refused to give them. In some northern regiments, black soldiers made up 25% of the entire fighting force. They were at Bunker Hill, at Saratoga, at Trenton, at Yorktown. Without black soldiers, there is no United States of America. And for 200 years, their names were deleted, their stories suppressed, their sacrifices dismissed as if they never happened. It was not until the 1990s that historians began seriously recovering what had been erased. Gravestones discovered in forgotten cemeteries. Pension records pulled from dusty government archives. Descendants coming forward with family stories passed down in whispers, because the official history had no room for the truth. In 2002, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment was finally honored with a monument. 200 years too late. But the truth always comes back. It does not stay buried. It breaks through. It demands to be heard. Private Cato Howe, Sergeant Prince Bent, Corporal Caesar Tarrant, and hundreds more whose names we will never know, because the records were destroyed or never kept in the first place. These men knew exactly what America was. They knew the country they were fighting for had enslaved them. They knew it saw them as property. They knew it would almost certainly betray them the moment the war was over. They fought anyway, because freedom is worth dying for, even when the nation you are defending refuses to give it to you. Because they believed in a principle that America itself had not yet earned the right to claim. That all people deserve liberty. They saved a nation that erased them. We will not. If this story hit you, share this video right now. Because the most powerful weapon against erasure is simple. Refuse to let the story die. And if you are new here, welcome to Ancestors and Oppos, Glory. Every week we go back into the history they buried, and we drag it into the light. Subscribe, because we are just getting started.